I'll go ahead.
Okay, all right. Okay,
So I guess I'd like to start off by going over a few of the problems that perhaps our current monetary system has and how Bitcoin aims to address those issues. And three of those would be that, first of all, 50% of people around the world are unbanked. 25% of Americans alone are unbanked. It can be very difficult for people with bad credit or people internationally who don't even have access to a financial institution to even get a bank. And this also leads to another interesting problem in that they're not connected to a global economy. The cost of sending money around the world is way too high. You've got companies like Western Union, MoneyGram taking 5 to 15% of the money that you're trying to send. And the third problem is our current monetary system doesn't seem to be secure enough. You've got events like the Target data breach and a few more recent data breaches that occurred. I think one with Chase Bank that Helen mentioned yesterday, shown that our current security systems might not be strict enough. So when Bitcoin was created, what it kind of allowed is, first of all, what Bitcoin is it's a digital currency and it's a program that for the first time in history is going to allow people from anywhere around the globe to send money to each other instantly without a fee and most importantly without a third-party intermediary like a bank or PayPal. So there's no one telling you what you can do with your money anymore, confiscating your funds. It's all up to you now. So this adds a level of both security and responsibility to the end user. You have to be responsible for your own Bitcoins now. So in a sense, Bitcoin is more secure than our current financial systems in that if you know how to protect your Bitcoins and you're brushed up on computer security, you'll definitely be able to retain control of your of your money as long as you have access to the internet. Now, the problem is a lot of us aren't. When I first got involved in Bitcoin, I got one of my accounts hacked and had 33 of my Bitcoins stolen, and I was social engineer scams, which is actually part of the motivation for why I created Bitquick.co, which is a Bitcoin trading platform. So there are a lot of services being built to address the security problems that Bitcoin inherently has. And these services, when you think about the security of Bitcoin, try and think of a parallel of if, let's say, Gmail got hacked. It doesn't necessarily mean that email is insecure itself. It means that a service that was utilizing email was insecure. Same thing with Bitcoin. A lot of major services that used Bitcoin. Some of you may have heard of the Mt. Gox failure, a Japanese Bitcoin exchange that was hacked and lost, I believe, 400,000 Bitcoins. These are the types of services that have been poorly managed, and you now have new services coming in to address these issues and make it easier for us as consumers to utilize this technology. So from a consumer perspective, how Bitcoin comes into the real world, there's actually already a lot of major retailers accepting Bitcoin. Overstock was one of the first major retailers to start accepting Bitcoin. They saw a lot of sales through Bitcoin, and one of the major advantages that they had when accepting Bitcoin for their purchases is Bitcoin transactions are inherently irreversible. It's kind of like digital cash in that if I give one of you $1 from my wallet, you have to physically come back to me and ask me to give it back or beat it out of me. Now, if you're spending money using a credit card, the merchant is going to be pulling the money from your account. And if something fishy goes on, you can go to your bank and say, hey, I didn't authorize this transaction, I'd like you guys to reverse it. So with Bitcoin, it kind of shifts that responsibility. It doesn't allow you as a consumer to reverse that transaction. So as a merchant, there's a huge incentive for me to want to accept Bitcoin because payments are settled instantly and there's no processing fee. So typically as a merchant, when I'm accepting your money through a credit card, I'm going to have to go through a merchant. And they're probably going to take anywhere from 2 to 3% of each transaction. So if as a merchant, if I accept Bitcoin, I can either take advantage of those 3% savings, or I can use some of that to provide the savings directly to the consumer. And because of the, I don't have to worry about chargebacks when I'm accepting Bitcoins, I actually have a lot of saved costs from fraud. Because a lot of the markup that comes from a lot of these products, the fact that there's a lot of credit card fraud going around. So a lot of your purchases ends up being reversed. So if you're accepting Bitcoin, you know there's a 0% fraud rate. Now, unfortunately, with Bitcoin, I think that the consumer incentive perhaps is a little underdeveloped at the moment. There's not a huge incentive as a consumer to want to use Bitcoin. Bitcoin, it's inherently volatile. The price is simply based off of supply and demand. And so a lot of you may have seen that the price of Bitcoin was up at $1,200 in December, and is actually currently around like $330. So you can really see a huge array of prices. So that's not beneficial for a consumer. And also, if you're using a credit card, you might be able to earn rewards points and things like that. But there's currently not a business out there in the Bitcoin ecosystem that offers those types of incentives for users. So some current statistics on the size of Bitcoin, kind of the Bitcoin ecosystem. There's approximately 6.5 million Bitcoin wallet users as of right now, and there's about 76,000 merchants that accept Bitcoin. I mentioned Overstock. There's also Tiger Direct. PayPal recently mentioned that they're integrating Bitcoin. Currently only use it for accepting digital products. But Dell.com also expanded Bitcoin, and I recently booked a hotel through Expedia and paid with Bitcoin, which is pretty cool. And so the 6.5 billion users and the 76,000 merchants, that's actually a 21% increase since July 2014. So in just one quarter, there's been continuous growth. And a pretty staggering number is the amount of venture capitalist investment that's gone into Bitcoin. As of this morning, I checked, there's $415 million invested in different Bitcoin companies. It's outpacing the dot-com bubble in terms of investors. So I believe that Bitcoin is going to be here to stay simply because you have institutional money starting to get interested and come behind this. Now, as far as coming back and referring to the policy implications that Bitcoin may have, it's very important not to classify Bitcoin as strictly a currency, because it's not. As you saw, the value is extremely volatile. It's somewhere in between a currency and an asset, and it really needs to be treated as its own thing. It's something we've never seen before, and I think that lawmakers need to wait a little bit and see how the technology develops, maybe 3 to 5 years, and see what are the interesting nuances that pop up, the security issues that may later on arise, scalability issues. But ultimately, Bitcoin is going to have you'll have to be creating regulation for decentralized systems as opposed to centralized systems as we have now. Now you're regulating financial institutions. You're looking at one institution that's holding all the records. They're in charge of holding your financial information, your identity, your money. But in the future, Bitcoin can allow the consumer to only have, I can create a wallet, for instance, where I'll generate a private key, which is essentially gives you a Bitcoin wallet, but only you will have access to the Bitcoin wallet, and I will never be able to actually use it. Every time you log into my service, you'll actually be decrypting your wallet with your own password, which means I can actually never take your money. So regulating that type of business is different than when you are regulating a bank who, if you actually give them the cash, they have physical control of the cash. So you have to have, there's a lot more oversight that goes into that. And another thing, unique thing that Bitcoin provides is a public ledger. That's one of the major innovations that Bitcoin is that every transaction on the Bitcoin network that occurs is reported on a public ledger. So now transparency can be enforced in a decentralized manner. You can just look at the public ledger on blockchain and you can see where funds are being sent. Whereas right now you're trusting a central entity to make sure that their books are kept straight.
Those are great points. Thank you very much. She said, if you're mining for Bitcoins, are you paying for them? How is this happening?
So a little bit about how Bitcoins are created and the supply. There's going to be 21 million Bitcoins ever created over time. And that supply, how it's distributed, is supposed to replicate gold. So at the very beginning of Bitcoin, just like gold, if you were a very early miner of gold with Bitcoin, it was quite easy to go ahead and get that gold or Bitcoins. Same thing with Bitcoin. Now, essentially what you're doing, the value that you're providing when you're doing Bitcoin mining, is another way to think about it is you're really just Bitcoin transaction processing. I mentioned that Bitcoin is just a giant public ledger, and the way it works is there's this thing called the blockchain, and the blockchain is that public ledger, and it's a chain of blocks of transactions. So as a miner, I'm trying to create a block of transactions, and every 10 minutes, a block of transactions is added to the network. And so if my computer is really, really strong, I'll be the first one to create that block of transactions and add it onto the chain of all the transactions that have occurred. And for my work, Bitcoin is programmed to go ahead and give me a little bit of Bitcoins for being the guy who created that block of transactions. And over time, the Bitcoin program will be developed to give me less and less of a reward. And it'll also cost me more and more money to invest into hardware resources to be able to obtain those Bitcoins.
To me, that doesn't really answer, because if I have this Bitcoin account that I've not paid any money to establish, and I go to Overstock and buy something, I haven't really paid for it. In my head, I haven't really paid for it, because my cash hasn't been high. I've not, my cash is on.
It's the foundation of the dollar bill.
So where does the value of the dollar
Let me try. So you'll have paid for the computer. You'll have, spent your labor to set up the computer and get this whole process going. And you'll be paying some pretty meaningful power bills over time. In fact, one of the things that's noted about Bitcoin is that Iceland has a strategic advantage because they have so much geothermal power that there's a lot of. It's not like no, it's very abstract, isn't it? Geothermal power gives them a strategic advantage in mining Bitcoin. Okay, so these sorts of things, yeah, there's just like everywhere else in the world, there are certain attributes, certain natural attributes that mean that Bitcoin can more easily be found or created by doing this sorts of transactional ledger work in a place like Iceland, in the same sense that gold may be easier to find in certain areas of the world than others.
Can't hear what you're saying.
Can't hear. The state, I'm just trying to build on his analogy about gold versus the Bitcoin that seems free, like you just grab it and it's there.
So you're like, you're getting the Bitcoin because you're doing a service to Bitcoin, mining, having a strong computer that's working to.
So like the value is behind that, kind of think of that. Whereas the value of our fiat currencies, it's more like the power of the U.S. government. If your government doesn't have any power, then your dollar is it's a piece of paper. If we're in Zimbabwe, then You don't want the piece of paper that's $1 because you could have 1 billion of them and you still can't buy a loaf of bread.
Well,
So
They were
most
actually
people,
this
if we're going to get involved in this, when there's no planning, we're going to go out and find it. That's how a Bitcoin owner is going to be able to convert his, digital file into something file.
exactly.
So I mean,
Was the point I was going to
how
make.
does the hotel decide what to charge for that Bitcoin?
So if you're accepting Bitcoin, really the way to think of it is if you're accepting cash through the method of Bitcoin. Most of these companies, they partner up with a Bitcoin payment processor, and that payment processor will actually accept Bitcoin. And then there's always a certain exchange rate, just like, gold is worth so much dollars an ounce, Bitcoin is worth so many dollars a Bitcoin at the moment. So if I want to charge you $20, I'll use my Bitcoin merchant account, and they will say, all right, let's say it's 0.01 Bitcoin. You'll pay 0.01 Bitcoin to the merchant. The merchant will actually give the retailer cash into their bank account. So when you accept Bitcoin, you're not actually exposed to the volatility. You're still accepting your cash value.
But how are you not exposed to the volatility? The merchant has to say, well, this room
The merchant is assuming the volatility, not the retailer, not the hotel. So at the time the transaction is made, the transaction is really between the Bitcoin owner and the merchant.
Like a
Not-
commodity.
Yeah, It's like saying if you give 100 shares of JP Morgan Chase stock to your church as a gift, what's the value of that? Well, it depends on the date of cash and delivery. Same thing applies here.
So you're saying a hotel has somehow
A big popular company is it's called BitPay. So let's say you're using BitPay, then you have the Bitcoin user. So the Bitcoin user is going to pay BitPay the Bitcoins. BitPay is actually going to generate the invoice and say, all right, at this moment, a Bitcoin is worth $340. Let's say your hotel room costs $340. You need to pay 1 Bitcoin in order for the merchant to accept your transaction. BitPay is only going to give you about 15 minutes to complete that transaction, and that's how they kind of lock in the value. You wait 15 more minutes, they'll kind of update immediately what the value should be. And that's how Expedia or whoever actually gets the value. Real time.